about it right now, everything's okay. No matter where you find yourself, no matter what kind of stuff is going on in your life, underneath it all, everything's actually all right. You're okay. You have more power than you might be giving yourself credit for. And if you have something that's going on in your life right now that's challenging, painful.
Hi there, beautiful. How are you today? How's your week going? Mine's going great. Thank you for asking, and I hope yours is too. I hope you are currently cuddled up with a good coffee or a good wine, because let's be real, no other beverages really measure up with those two. My name is Liz, and I like to talk about things like true crime, weird history, conspiracy theories, and if you've seen this mug before, welcome back, and if not, welcome. It's really nice to meet you, and I hope you will stick around for a little while. Today we're going to be talking about an Australian true crime case. You could say the Australian true crime case. The very sad death of baby Azaria Chamberlain Chamberlain. And while if you are not a fellow Aussie, you may not be familiar with that name at all, I can pretty much guarantee you're familiar with her mother's famous words, "A dingo stole my baby." We're going to begin our look into this case at 8:37 p.m. on the 29th of October 1982, when after a deliberation of 6 hours and 15 minutes, Lindy Chamberlain was found guilty of first-degree murder by a jury of her peers. There was no real surprise here to the majority of the people in the courtroom or to the many eagerly awaiting people watching their TVs moments later when the news broke. In places all over the country where the trial was being publicly televised, cheers and applause broke out when the verdict was announced. The trial had lasted a long 46 days, and the evidence presented in that time against Lindy had been catastrophically devastating. While Lindy's defense claimed that baby Azaria had been taken in the night by a dingo from a tent while the family had been camping at Ayres Rock in the Northern Territory, the prosecution presented evidence against Lindy that painted a much darker picture. There had been fetal blood found in 22 different places in the family car. A very prominent forensic expert testified in court that the tears in Azaria's jumpsuit had been made from scissors and not dingo teeth. There was also a total lack of saliva, drag marks, or debris found on the jumpsuit that one would expect if the baby had been taken by a dingo and dragged away. What was present, however, was a bloody handprint on the back of the jumpsuit. And the animal hairs that were found on the jumpsuit and in the family tent were identified to be cat hairs, not dingo hairs. Based on this damning collection of evidence, the prosecution claimed that Lindy had used a pair of scissors to cut Azaria's throat while sitting in the front passenger seat of the family car, and then, with the help of her husband Michael, created, in their words, a calculated, fanciful lie about the baby being stolen by a dingo. And so, with no body, no motive, no eyewitness accounts, no confession, and no murder weapon, Lindy Chamberlain was sentenced to life in prison with hard labour, and her husband Michael received a 3-year suspended sentence for accessory after the fact. There was only one little issue. Lindy and her husband were completely innocent. So now that you have a general understanding of the case, I want to back up and tell you a bit more about the Chamberlain family and the events surrounding baby Azaria's death. Lindy Chamberlain was born Alice Lynn Murchison on the 4th of March 1948 in New Zealand, but grew up in Victoria. Her father was a pastor with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and as such she was raised in a very religious family. For those of you that have never heard of it, the Seventh-day Adventist Church falls under the Protestant denomination of Christianity. Among the details that set them apart from other denominations is their strict observance of the seventh day in the Christian calendar, otherwise known as the Sabbath, their strong focus on the second coming of Christ, and their dietary requirements, which include kosher food laws and, in some cases, vegetarianism. Michael Chamberlain was born on the 27th of February 1944 in Christchurch, New Zealand, and his father was a warrant officer with the Royal New Zealand Air Force in World War II. His mother worked in administration with the Seventh-day Adventist Church in South New Zealand. Lindy and Michael met in 1968 and were married in 1969. Michael obtained his Bachelor of Arts in Theology and became a Seventh-day Adventist minister in Tasmania, Australia, where they lived for 5 years. Lindy worked as a dressmaker and a tailor, specialising in wedding dresses, as well as fulfilling the demanding role and completing the duties required of a clergyman's wife. As someone who was raised as a pastor's kid and watching my mother during my own childhood, I can attest that this would have been a full-time job just on its own. From photos like these, they seem like a really cool, down-to-earth couple, and personally, I think they would have been really interesting to know. On the 2nd of October 1973, Lindy gave birth to their first son, Aiden. They then moved to Queensland, where their second son, Regan, was born on the 16th of April 1976. As you can see, Lindy and Michael made really cute kids, and when Azaria was born on the 11th of June 1980, she was no exception. At birth, she weighed a very healthy 6 pounds 5 ounces, had a shock of dark hair, dark violet eyes, and olive skin. The Chamberlains chose the name Azaria for their baby girl as it had Hebrew origins and meant God has helped or blessed of God, and they could not have been more in love or thrilled with the new arrival to their family. On the 13th of August 1980, when Aiden was 6, Regan was 4, and Azaria was just 9 weeks old, the Chamberlain family set off from their home, the mining town Mount Isa, and packed into their now infamous canary yellow Holden Tirana. They were on their first holiday as a family of 4 and were headed to Central Australia, or more specifically, Uluru or Ayres Rock in the Northern Territory. The family arrived at Uluru quite late on the 16th of August and set up their tent next to their car in the campground. The next morning, Michael and the boys climbed parts of Ayres Rock, whereas Lindy and Azaria explored an area called the Fertility Cave. While near the cave, Lindy spotted some dingoes, and as she told a detective later, she immediately felt on edge and like they were watching baby Azaria. On top of Lindy's encounter near the cave, there were numerous reports of dingoes being on the campsite that night. In fact, Uluru Chief Ranger Derek Roth had spent the last 2 years trying to convince the Northern Territory government to implement a cull of the dingoes, advising of instances where the animals had attempted to snatch young children, including an attack on a 3-year-old just 6 weeks before the Chamberlains arrived. So we've reached the fatal night of the 17th of August, the night that would see such a tragic and brutal end to Azaria's short life. The events that follow have been confirmed by multiple witnesses that were on the campgrounds that night. Just before 8 p.m, Lindy, Michael, Aiden, and Azaria, who was bundled in Lindy's arms, were gathered at the communal barbecue area, chatting with other campers while Regan slept in the tent. The campers at the barbecue area included Greg and Sally Lowe, a couple who were also holidaying with an infant. Sally said that when she went to the bin to throw away scraps from dinner, she turned around to see a dingo following her. Half an hour earlier to this, another witness, Murray Havey, who was camping with his family on the site directly next to the Chamberlains, as in literally meters away from them, said that they saw a dingo outside their camper van, took photos of it, and fed it. Back at the barbecue area, Lindy chastised Michael for feeding a dingo that had lingered close to the bench they were sitting at, telling him he shouldn't encourage them, then said that she was going to go and put Azaria down for sleep in the tent. Lindy put Azaria safely down in her white cane bassinet next to her sleeping brother Regan, before rejoining her fellow campers at the barbecue area 6 to 10 minutes later. Later in court, another witness, Judy West, would testify that not long after Lindy had put Azaria down, she heard a dingo growl, deep and low, outside the tent. This was after earlier in the day she had had to shoo away a dingo who had grabbed her 12-year-old daughter by the arm and pulled. It was just minutes after Judy heard this growl that a baby's cry was heard coming from the direction of the Chamberlain tent. This cry was heard by Lindy herself, as well as 3 other witnesses, including Sally Lowe. The cry was described as short, sharp, and unfinished. Lindy went to the tent to investigate, and it was only short moments later that she screamed her famous words, My God, the dingo has my baby. According to Murray Havey, Lindy told him that when she was on her way to Azaria, she saw a dingo leaving the tent, and when she looked inside, the baby was nowhere to be found. He immediately grabbed a torch and headed in the direction that Lindy said the dingo had gone. It turned out that Havey was actually an amateur animal tracker with years of experience. He says he found the tracks of a heavier dog or a dog that was carrying something. He followed them for about 100 meters, at which point he said the animal put its load down, indicated by pressure in the sand. There was the impression of a knitted garment as well as a damp spot of either saliva or blood. Unfortunately, Havey lost the tracks once they headed into the car park. His record of the tracks was confirmed by both the Chief Ranger of Uluru, Derek Roth, as well as local Aboriginal trackers later. Soon, the campgrounds were alight with the torches of 300 men and women searching the dark scrublands for any sign of baby Azaria, but unfortunately, their efforts were in vain. The first police investigator to arrive noted a pool of blood on the floor of the Chamberlain tent, as well as paw prints leading away from the tent entrance. So the next day, on the 18th of August, as in the very next day after their baby has disappeared, the Chamberlains gave an interview to the press. And in the interview, they talk about the blood in the tent, the sharp rip in a blanket, and they tell their story of the dingo taking Azaria. The police, upon watching the video, felt that the Chamberlains seemed too composed, too comfortable in front of the cameras, and not at all like two people who had just lost their baby. And having watched the interview, to be honest, it's fair enough, especially on Michael's part. He seems very rehearsed, but he's also a pastor, very used to speaking in public to a lot of people, and I think this may have been a major factor in how he came across. The investigation into the disappearance of Azaria was flawed from the beginning. The forensic officer who had been tasked with examining the scene and collecting evidence, Myra Fogarty, she had been on the job for exactly 3 months. 3 months. She admitted in an interview years later that she had no idea what she was doing and was relying on information she got from newspaper articles to guide her. On the 24th of August, 1 week after her disappearance, Azaria's clothes, including her jumpsuit, singlet, nappy, and booties, were found on a heavily used animal path at the base of Ayres Rock. The only thing that wasn't found was the matinee jacket that Lindy claimed she had also been wearing. As part of my research for this video, I watched a documentary called The Lindy Tapes. It is available on YouTube. I'll link it down below, and I highly recommend it. It was really interesting to watch. It's revealed in the documentary that back in the 80s, when this was occurring, the Northern Territory Police Department recorded secret tapes of pretty much everything, not just interviews and interrogations, but also conversations between police officers. And they play some of the tapes in the documentary, and it's abundantly clear from these tapes that very quickly police became uninterested in uncovering the truth in what happened with Azaria, but instead finding evidence that would fit the theory they were forming that Lindy had killed Azaria and Michael had helped her cover it up. When Murray Havey was approached by police to be interviewed about the evening Azaria disappeared, police opened the interview by saying they were looking for evidence that would lead to a conviction of Lindy. Sally Lowe, one of the witnesses that had heard baby Azaria cry, was interrogated, not just interviewed, interrogated for 2 hours because her account of what had happened and the cry did not match up with the version of events that police were trying to put together, but she wouldn't back down. In fact, all of the campground witnesses backed Lindy and Michael up, saying they seemed like normal, happy, caring parents, that Lindy had that new mum glow to her, and none of them could believe this theory that the police were pushing that Lindy had killed Azaria. In the first coroner inquest into baby Azaria's death, held on the 16th of December 1980, which was televised, fueling an already ugly media firestorm, Magistrate and Coroner Dennis Barrett found Azaria's death had been the result of a dingo attack and that no one in the family had any part whatsoever in her death. He also ripped into police and strongly criticised their treatment of the Chamberlains. However, he also stated that he thought someone was guilty of trying to cover baby Azaria's death up, saying that after her death, baby Azaria's body was taken from the dingo and disposed of by person or persons unknown. I'm sure he expected that after announcing his findings that police would hang their tail between their legs and slink away into the darkness, but of course this didn't happen. Instead, it seemed to achieve the opposite. On the 19th of September 1981, police conducted a raid on the Chamberlain family home and seized over 300 items, including their car. And I love this. When Lindy was told by police that the raid was prompted in part by the findings of James Cameron, not the film producer, but instead the British forensic pathologist, who, when examining pictures of Azaria's jumpsuit, that's right, not the jumpsuit itself, but pictures of the jumpsuit, said that there was no way that the damage had been caused by dingo teeth. Her response was, "I didn't know there were any dingo experts in London." She's so badass. Speaking of forensic expert James Cameron, if police had bothered to do any research at all before they enlisted his services, they would have found that his background was less than favourable. He had in fact landed multiple innocent people in jail prior to Lindy, with expert testimonies in court that were later shown to be totally inaccurate. The car proved to be the police department's smoking gun, and I'm sure they could not believe their luck and rubbed their grubby little hands with glee when, upon testing 22 different areas of the car, returned positive results for fetal hemoglobin, as in blood found in babies under 6 months old. Among the areas that tested positive was under the front passenger seat, the car door handle, the seat belt buckle, and most notably, under the glove box. Investigators pushed the theory that the pattern of blood under the glove box showed a spray pattern that was most likely caused by blood from a cut artery, which fit their theory that Lindy had cut Azaria's throat in the front passenger seat. Given this new evidence, in November of 1981, the Attorney General of Northern Territory filed a motion for the findings of the first inquiry to be quashed, and there was a second inquiry held on the 14th of December 1981. It was in this inquiry that Lindy was charged with murder and Michael as accessory after the fact. And I know what you're thinking. Dodgy investigation or not, all that blood in the car proves that Lindy was guilty, right? Wrong. You see, the tricky thing about the testing method used for fetal hemoglobin in this case is it was flawed, and there did not have to be blood present for it to turn back a positive result. Kind of a big deal. Things that could return a positive result included mucus from the nose, as in from sneezing, which could produce a spray pattern like the one under the glove box. Also, blood from an adult with abnormally high fetal hemoglobin levels. And the Chamberlains did in fact pick up a bleeding hitchhiker back in 1979 in that same car. More interestingly, chocolate milkshake could produce a positive result. However, in this case, the positive result most likely came from a combination of sound deadener sprayed underneath the car's dashboard during manufacture and the presence of copper dust, as Mount Isa, where the Chamberlains lived, was a copper mining town. In just another display of total disregard of the search for truth by investigators, one of the world's most foremost experts in mammal hair, Hans Brunner, as in he's literally written a book on the subject, he happened to be in Australia at the time of Azaria's disappearance, and he contacted police upon finding out the news that there had been animal hair found in the tent. He told them who he was and what he specialised in and offered to come in and give his expert opinion on the hairs. He says he was told by police not to worry and that Lindy was guilty anyway. As you might remember from the beginning of the video, the expert the police did choose to go with testified in court that the hairs found were cat hairs. However, when Hans was finally able to come in and examine the hairs for himself, he was able to conclusively confirm without a doubt that the hairs were from a dingo. Now, this was Australia's first real trial by media, and it was all anyone could talk about at home, at work, at school, at church, anywhere. Everyone had an opinion on the case, and these opinions were fueled by a sensationalist media who just ran rampant, spreading ridiculous lies about the Chamberlains. The Seventh-day Adventist Church was not well known by the average person, and in the age of satanic panic, this instantly turned them into a cult in the eyes of the public. Lindy and Michael were accused of sacrificing Azaria as part of their religious beliefs. The name Azaria was even rumoured to mean sacrifice in the wilderness. I mean, I just cannot imagine losing your 9-week-old baby and then having people say all these terrible things about you. They were even rumoured to have links to the Jonestown massacre. Lindy in particular, of course, was heavily scrutinised by the media, and she's later said that she didn't know what to do in front of the cameras. She couldn't win. If she smiled, she was rejoicing in the death of her baby girl. If she frowned, she was a bitch. What fanned the flames at the stake even higher was that when the trial began on the 13th of September 1982, just over 2 years after the death of baby Azaria, Lindy was 7 months pregnant. People absolutely lost their minds. It was said that she was openly mocking the judicial system, pregnant with one baby, went on trial for murdering the last one. It was scandalous. The trial began with a strong start for the defence, with all the campground witnesses backing up Lindy's story and painting a glowing picture of the Chamberlains. However, obviously, the tables quickly turned when the prosecution brought in expert after expert after expert with their top-notch, totally not flawed forensic evidence. Here was the prosecution's version of events. Lindy was at the communal barbecue area along with all the other campground witnesses. She then left with her son Aiden and headed to the tent. When she got to the tent, Aiden went inside and she headed to the car, just meters away. She then sat in the passenger seat and cut Azaria's throat before stuffing her into a camera bag. She headed back to the tent again, a couple of meters away, cleaned herself up, planted spots of Azaria's blood, and then went back to the barbecue area where not one person noticed anything different about her. All this within the 6 to 10 minutes that she was away from the barbecue area. Our mate, British expert James Cameron, took the stand, sharing his expert opinion that the tears in the jumpsuit were made with scissors and not dingo teeth. He also showed the jury slides of the jumpsuit made with ultraviolet light, which he said showed a bloody handprint on the back. When Lindy took the stand, she was asked to place her hand next to the slides, and everyone quickly realised that Lindy only had 3 phalanges, along with every other human, basically, whereas the bloody handprint had 4 phalanges. Also, the bloody handprint was later proven to be simply dust. James Cameron hadn't even bothered to test it. There was, of course, the lack of saliva, drag marks, and debris on the jumpsuit. And when Lindy was testifying, she said again, as she had multiple times, that Azaria had been wearing a matinee jacket over the jumpsuit, and this would have soaked up any saliva. However, again, the jacket had never been found, so the prosecution brushed this off as just part of the crazy lie that Lindy had created to cover up the murder of her daughter. So despite all of the campsite witnesses' testimonies backing up Lindy and the fact that the prosecution never even bothered to provide a motive for the murder, on the 29th of October 1982, the jury found Lindy guilty and she was sentenced to life without parole with hard labour. She was 8 months pregnant at this point. Lindy gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl while under custody on the 17th of November 1982 and named her Kalia. As it was ruled by the Northern Territory government that it was against Kalia's best interests for Lindy to have custody of her while in prison, Kalia spent the first few years of her life with foster families. Luckily for Lindy, while a lot of people thought she was guilty, there were a lot of others that believed a great miscarriage of justice had occurred, and they fought for her. The evidence that was used to convict her was being reviewed, and it was quickly unraveling. However, over the next couple of years, both Lindy's appeals, first to the Federal Court in 1983 and then to the High Court in 1984, were denied. Her application for early release was also denied in November of 1985. In January of 1986, a British hiker by the name of David Brett tragically died when he fell while climbing Ayres Rock. It took 8 days for police to find his body, which was found in an area full of dingo lairs at the base of Ayres Rock. And it was on the 2nd of February during this search that a very, very significant knitted garment was found, half buried in the desert sand, Azaria's matinee jacket. From here, everything moved very quickly. On the 5th of February, Lindy was called in and identified the jacket without hesitation as Azaria's. And on the 7th of February, 1986, just 5 days after the jacket was found, Lindy was released from prison. She had spent 3 years and 3 months in jail. The Northern Territory government also announced that there would be a third inquiry into Azaria's death. Lindy was finally free, but it took decades for the Chamberlains to officially clear their name. While the Northern Territory Court of Criminal Appeals finally quashed all convictions against Lindy and Michael Chamberlain in September 1988, it was not until a fourth coroner's inquiry in June 2012 that Azaria's death was finally ruled to be the result of a dingo attack. And for her troubles, Lindy received a payment of $1.3 million in 1992, an amount that did not even cover a third of the Chamberlains' legal expenses. The fallout for the Chamberlain family in the wake of Azaria's death and the events that followed is simply unimaginable. With the case being so publicised, Azaria's poor brothers, Aidan and Regan, were relentlessly bullied and ostracised in school. Lindy also said in an interview that Aidan blamed himself for Azaria's death for years, thinking it was his fault because he didn't zip up the tent. Can you imagine the impact of that guilt on a 6-year-old boy? It actually is heartbreaking. As I mentioned, Kalia spent the first 3 years of her life with foster families, and while she says she had a very positive experience in the foster care system, those were 3 years that she should have been with her mother, Lindy, and this would have had a profound impact on her early childhood development. Lindy and Michael divorced in 1991, but Lindy has made it clear that the divorce was not a result of Azaria's death or the trial, rather from issues that were already in the marriage before Azaria was even born. In the years following the trial, Michael remarried to a woman named Ingrid and lost his calling as a pastor, moving instead to activism against persecution and education in Indigenous schools. Michael and Ingrid had a daughter named Zara before Ingrid tragically suffered a stroke that left her paralysed. Michael Chamberlain died due to complications from leukemia on the 9th of January 2017, aged 72. These days, Lindy gives seminars, lectures, and keynote addresses on multiple topics, ranging from the media's responsibility when it comes to reporting the news, lawyers' responsibilities to seek the truth, and be impartial, also dealing with grief and finding faith and perspective beyond religion. While on a speaking tour in 1992 in the US, Lindy met Rick Cretan and the two married later that year. So Lindy now goes by Lindy Chamberlain Cretan. They are still happily married, and Lindy is currently working on a children's book as well as another book on dealing with grief and forgiveness. Despite being totally cleared of the crime she was accused of, there is still a large amount of people that believe Lindy Chamberlain is guilty, and an even larger amount of people worldwide who think of the death of 9-week-old baby Azaria as nothing more than a punchline in pop culture references. With that in mind, I can't even comprehend how strong and resilient Lindy Chamberlain must be to even manage to survive the last 40 years. Years ago, an interviewer asked Lindy that if there was just one lesson that she had learned from her experience over the last 7 years, what would it be? Lindy's tongue-in-cheek response: don't trust the police. And that is it for the case of Azaria Chamberlain. I hope I've done it justice and I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, help a sister out, hit the like button. If you want to hear more of my talking words and sounds and stuff, then hit subscribe and hit the bell so you actually know when I put out a new video. Thank you for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your week, and until next time, see you later, alligator. In a while, crocodile.
Might be giving yourself.
You can tell I have a 3-year-old.
If you have something that's going on in your life right now that's challenging, painful, it's just a reminder to take a little bit better care of yourself. Because you're worth it. You can have this feeling anytime.